No, I would just say, be a collaborator with your local park and rec department. And if you're not an active participant in the services offered, or you don't, regularly visit a park or an open space or trail, just recognize the value that those things bring to quality of life in the community.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Active Towns channel. My name is John Simmerman, and that is Jamie Sabbach from the firm 110% in Salida, Colorado. And we are going to be talking about parks and recreation and fiscal sustainability. Yes, we are mashing those two up. Very strong towns-esque of us. But before we dive into this, I just want to say, hey, thank you all so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. This is going to be the final episode for the year 2025. And I am incredibly grateful for all of you tuning in week after week, year after year, for all of these episodes. Again, thank you so very, very much. And if you're noticing the change in the backdrop, that's because I am in my new house here in Hawaii, in Kailua Kona. So we have a different and new look. It's a little bit more tropical in nature. And super, super excited for 2026 and sharing some new conversations with you all. And hey, here is a little request for all of you. If you have any recommendations of folks that you would like to hear from on the Active Towns podcast, please drop me a line. Let me know who you think should be here on the podcast profiled, even if it's a return guest, somebody who you'd like to get an update from. So without further ado, let's get right to it with Jamie. Jamie, welcome to the Active Towns podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Jamie, I love giving my guests just a really quick opportunity to introduce themselves. So who the heck is Jamie?
I'm currently a consultant for public park and recreation systems across the United States. I came by way of being a local government employee for over 20 years. I guess to the probably more curious stuff, originally from Chicago, live in the mountains of Colorado today, and feel very privileged to have the opportunity to work alongside local government professionals, policymakers, community members, to help them create what we refer to as financial sustainability or financially sustainable systems for their park and rec systems. And if you think about it through the lens of quality of life and public health, it really, I think, tends to resonate a little bit more with folks. But I've been a long time consultant, educator, practitioner, and we, again, have the privilege of working with folks all across the United States to help them create these kind of enduring communities by way of their park and rec systems. So there's a lot more to the backstory, but I think that probably hits the high points.
Love it. That's fantastic. And of course, you and I were connected through a cat by the name of Ryan Short. So we have to give him a little bit of love right up at the top here. Again, huge thanks to Ryan. He has a brand new book that's just now come out, The Civic Brand. And the two of you are based, interestingly enough, in Salida, Colorado. So I'm here in Kailua Kona, Hawaii, and I'm dressed in my festive, wear here because it is Tuesday, December 16th, 10 days prior to when this episode is going out on the 26th. So a little bit of the backstory. How on earth did you arrive in Salida, Colorado, which is one of the most beloved active towns that I have had the opportunity to visit and profile before?
Yeah, great question. I'm not sure I even know the full story. I sometimes think about that. But, Chicago kid, ended up in Colorado completely by accident 22 years ago, lived in Boulder for a number of years. And my wife and I very simply got an itch to go do something Labor Day weekend in 2015, came to the town that we had actually brought the kids to many years ago. We had hiked here, we had rafted here, we had biked here. Came for a long weekend, found ourselves coming back with frequency, picking up real estate magazines, and lo and behold, in 2016, we moved here full time. It's a very special, magical place. I feel very fortunate to live here, and many of the locals refer to it as living in vacation. So it's a pretty special place.
And I say this a lot here on the channel. Boulder was the quintessential active towns. It was the inspiration for me launching the Active Towns initiative back in 2012. And I kept hearing about Salida, and people kept saying, "Oh, you've also have to go visit Salida and check it out because it too is one of those quintessential active towns." You just rattled it off. The things that you mentioned were the activities that people normally participate in. And Ryan and I ended up talking a little bit about this too, because with the Civic brand stuff where his mind is, we're constantly talking about, how do you create a culture where this is part of the DNA of the place, a culture of activity, as I like to say. I mean, you guys have that in spades. Do you know anything about the history of Salida? I mean, was this like an early part of the culture that just sort of, was planted, a seed that was planted and then just continued to mature over time?
It would really be hard for me to, speak to the history. I know very little about it, honestly. The history, my context is really probably in the last 15, 20 years, again, being a visitor and now being a resident. There's a graciousness to this place. There's a sense of community, which sounds very cliche, but I hear that a lot in my work. And, everyone thinks they're unique. And frankly, there are very few unique places that I've been to. This place really has something special, a secret sauce, if you will. And I think it's rooted in the people who come here because they're coming here to be part of a community that's different than many. And I think, this idea of activity is certainly a part of it. We refer to it as living in the middle of an outdoor playground. But there's a sense of togetherness. There's a sense of connection. There's a sense of, again, I will use the word graciousness again. People are very giving. They're very considerate, which is interesting to think about in today's reality. How polarized we've become as a society. The things that we talk about tend to be, they lean more towards the negative rather than the positive. And I think folks here really care. They care deeply for the community in which they've chosen to live. They care for one another, and you can feel it. I posted on LinkedIn recently a picture of our downtown parade. It's a holiday parade the day after Thanksgiving. And we light up what is S Mountain, what we call Christmas Mountain during the holidays. And there's a fireworks display. And the community has 5,500 people in it. We live in a county of 20,000 people. And there's easily a couple thousand people that converge on the downtown area. And it feels a little bit like Mayberry. I've just dated myself for those who remember Handy Griffith. It's got that real kind of incredible small town feel. And it's just hard to pinpoint the exact why. But again, there's a feeling and there's a meaningfulness to being here and being in this place. And it's sometimes just very difficult to describe until you experience it. And again, very fortunate to be here. No doubt about it.
Yeah. One of the things that comes to mind when you were just talking a little bit about that was, understanding the history and the context of the place. You just shared a few things about the context. You're a smaller mountain town. It's not, and even Boulder as a college town. I mean, it's not a particularly big place. I mean, 100,000, people right around that area. And so what I really like to, emphasize on the Active Towns channel is a lot of the things that we end up talking about sometimes get de facto considered massive city related things, massive urban related things. But these concepts of creating places that encourage healthy, active living can happen in small rural environments and rural towns, mid-sized cities as well as big cities. I mean, access to parks, access to nature, access to, trails and pathways and safer low-speed streets. These are things that can happen regardless of the size of the municipality that you have. The other thing that I was reminded of as you were just talking about that was some of the research that I did in Boulder about sort of, well, how did Boulder become like this place where people gravitated to? Because you just mentioned that, people like go out of their way to move to a place that, kind of supports the lifestyle that they have or would like to have. And it was fascinating to read about Sanitas and the original hospital up on Mapleton there, and the sanitarium, and how they accessed and utilized the beautiful trail system and the open space network which is now open space network of trails and pathways, et cetera. But the whole reason why Mount Sanitas is because of the sanitarium and because of the that ethic of for these patients who were basically recovering from tuberculosis, many of them from the East Coast, they had daily walks. And so it was starting to create this, again, that culture of activity, that sense of, this is what we do in Boulder. We've got mountain trails all over the place. We have world famous rock climbing faces on the Flatirons. And you start getting that DNA, you start getting that groove of, this is who we are. We're a city of runners, elite level runners and cyclists, elite level cyclists. But at the same time, it's just everyday people who are like caught up in that momentum of wanting to live a healthy, active lifestyle. And what I like to emphasize is that cities that don't have that can create that by creating an environment, working on an environment that, takes into consideration building what I like to call these activity assets. Now, your business is all about creating a specific type of activity asset as well as a wellness asset. Talk a little bit about the work that you all do and, with 110%.
Sure. I certainly could have done a better job in the intro, but Parks and Recreation is that's our lane. Local government, most folks recognize that their first touch point with their government is by way of a public park or entering a rec center, taking their children to a playground, whatever it might be. And so it's a critical part of quality of life in a community. Some would suggest the most important part of quality of life in a community. We tend to be a bit of a unicorn because while we are in this space and we all have been practitioners, we've all been in a local government or many local governments serving the park and rec industry, we focus primarily on fiscal stewardship. We've got a lot of communities that have frankly overextended themselves. They've built a lot of things they can no longer take care of. And, it's a bit of a tragic story that we're now trying to figure out how are we going to make sure that these parks become a legacy in the communities. We talk often about, it's easy to plan for the citizens of 2025, but how do you ensure that you're leaving a positive legacy for the citizens of 2050? What are you leaving behind in terms of liability and assets and so on? So we are all privileged to serve this field. Frankly, I don't think there's any more important form of government. Some would argue public safety is, but if you think about the public health implications of parks and recreation in a community, they're pretty astounding. They're dramatic, and they're incredibly influential to the quality of our lives. So we emphasize public health. We are a public health profession, and it's just essentially kind of shifting perspective on the field and taking it, frankly, a little bit more seriously than many do. We're beyond day camps and, special events and daddy-daughter dances. It's significantly more deep and rich than that. So our three pillars are ethical decision-making, fiscal stewardship, and adaptive leadership in a very dynamic society today with an economy that's constantly changing, social dynamics always shifting, and then obviously environmental concerns that we all carry regardless of where we are in the world.
Yeah. Now, this is your team. Why don't you go ahead and introduce your team here?
Yeah, so this is the dream team. We are small. I've heard somebody recently call us a boutique consulting firm, and admittedly, I do not like that word, but nonetheless, we are small but mighty, and we've chosen to stay that way. We're very discerning about the projects we entertain. Again, all of us have been in the field. To my on the screen to the left is Farrell Buller. She's a principal, an executive coach, former park and rec director turned city manager turned consultant. In the background is Alexis Ranke. She's a project consultant and data analyst. She does most of our cost of service analysis work, the stuff that's least sexy, most critical. And then on the right is Matt David. He's our utility player. He really, frankly, is our handler. He takes care of the day-to-day, definitely behind the scenes, but he makes the engine run. And they're an incredibly powerful group, and I'm very privileged to work alongside each of them.
Now, here's an interesting question for you, because in today's day and age, I wonder about this. Are you all based there in Salida, or is this a remote team?
This is primarily remote team. Alexis and Farrell are in the Denver metro area. I, of course, am in Salida, 3 hours outside of Denver. And then Matt is actually in Stillwater, Minnesota, just east of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area.
Fantastic. And where is the setting of this photo?
This is actually in the Front Range, Westminster, outside of Denver. This was a team retreat. We get together twice a year, once in Salida in the spring. And then in the winter, we always get together in the Denver metro area. Matt flies in with his amazing wife and little boy, and we do our strategic planning sessions. And you can tell by the looks on our faces, we actually have a good time. So,
Yeah. That is fantastic. So in your intro to the organization, you said a few words that really harken back to the terminology that my very good friend and frequent guest here on the podcast, Chuck Marone with Strongtowns uses, because it really emphasizes that concept of fiscal responsibility of how we design our communities and our cities. And he and I were having a discussion as we were in Providence, Rhode Island for the CNU and Strongtowns National Gathering this past spring, early summer. I think it was in June. And we were walking through a parkway or a park, and we were reflecting on the fact that these are not just amenities. These are not just extras. This is part of the reason why a community is truly successful, which is exactly what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think collective, right? Our communities tend to take those public lands for granted sometimes. And that's through my lens and what I see through my experiences, unless we are the direct beneficiary, right? If I don't use that park, I don't take my children to that playground, my kids aren't in that, that baseball league, whatever it might be. There's a bit of a dismiss around the value of that to our community. And understanding that they can be incredibly productive assets to our community when we may not be the direct beneficiary. So thinking about it in this broad stroke way, we use the phrase common good a lot, rather than focusing solely on what's good for any one user or individual. How do these things, these assets, these amenities, these gifts to our communities really contribute to the quality of life for everyone? And I think there's a bit of a dismiss. In a community like a Boulder, where I would suggest the majority of the community are quite active. I worked for the city of Boulder for quite a few years, and we did many surveys and found that over 90% of the community actually used parks, trails, open spaces in Boulder. If you look across the country, that figure is probably going to be closer to 50 or 60%. And so communities are going to value those spaces differently. There's no doubt about it. But the richness that they provide a community, and again, contribute to this idea of overall quality of life, can sometimes be overlooked. And we in our field try to hammer home the point that these things are precious and they're gifts, and we need to be thoughtful about how we acquire, how we build, how we develop, and how we maintain, so that we frankly don't lose them and we don't we don't diminish their quality and their contributions to our overall community.
Right. Which brings us around to financial sustainability.
Yep. So again, it's certainly a hard story to tell. We're an incredibly important part of a local community's quality of life, yet we're fragile, like all of local government, if we don't do things well. And unfortunately, there's story after story after story today about communities being on fiscal cliffs, overextending themselves, building beyond their means, extending debt to the next generation. And it's really become a very unfortunate narrative. And part of our work, and I would say a majority of our work, is in the lane of fiscal stewardship. It's helping systems understand how they spend money, how they spend taxpayer dollars, spend and invest, if you will, investing for return of some kind, and creating strategies to ensure, at least try to ensure, that they are a sustainable organization. The stewardship is the means, the sustainability is the ends. So we do deep dives with park and rec systems across the country. We've worked in Napa, California, Austin, Texas, Brookline, Massachusetts, the Chicago metro area, and everywhere in between. And we want to help them understand how they're spending and investing taxpayer resources, those subsidies, those precious subsidies they have, ensuring they're having the greatest impact on their community, and frankly, that they can pay their bills. That's a very succinct Cliff Notes version of what it is, but it's the stuff that a lot of folks very simply do not want to talk about. It's not warm and fuzzy. It's challenging. It's not complicated, but it's complex. And it's critically important. It's a foundation from which organizations can think about supporting and enduring, as opposed to just continuing to be enamored with growth and development and adding more things. It's how do you take care of what you have? How do you write the checks? I always say, you can have all these great aspirations, big social service hearts, but if you can't write the checks, nothing else matters. And so it's a critically important part of ensuring that these systems are around for the long haul. And some of us that have been around a while, as I have, are quite worried about the future of our profession, frankly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and to bring this back around to sort of the Strong Towns narrative and the things that Chuck talks about with his team, and has brought us around to really kind of understanding too, is that it's difficult for us to be able to support the built environment that we have created as we have spread out through horizontal expansion. You simply cannot tax people enough to be able to support the infrastructure that you have. So you're constantly, he calls it the Ponzi scheme, this illusion of wealth that you have, because you cannot do that. And that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, with these activity assets that we're building, these parks and trails and pathways and linear parks, is that if it's difficult for us to create that financial stability and sustainability if you're just spread so thin across the landscape. How do you sort of balance that with these cities? Having lived in Austin, Texas for the past 11 years, we have a pretty good access to parks and access to open space and access to trails and pathways on a per capita basis. You can access them, but it's one of the worst in terms of on a per capita basis of funding said parks. And so they're constantly in disrepair and ill maintenance.
Again, a level of complexity, certainly. So if you think about your parks, and as we think about this work, you think about your parks, your trails, your open spaces, things that are intended to be accessible to anyone. Sometimes they're just not. But the idea is that, just because something's available doesn't mean it's accessible. But the intention is that you're trying to create these spaces that are accessible to a majority of, if not the entire community. And those are places we refer to as self-directed, right? You can self-direct your activity in a park, a trail, right? I can go for a walk. I don't need anybody to instruct me on taking a hike, taking a walk, taking my child to the playground. What we've done is we've compromised those spaces by way of these ambitions around, we need a rec center. We need pickleball courts. We need more pools. Those are not needs. Those are desires and those are interests. And they've become expectations of communities that are loud and demanding. And we have not been able to meet the expectation by way of the operations and maintenance of these assets. It's easy to build. It's easy to spend money, right? It's easy to construct a property. It's much more difficult to figure out how you're going to operate and you're going to maintain it over the next 20 years. That's the rub. So if you think about it, there's no narrative. I mean, we've created a cultural narrative in Parks and Recreation that we've got to be everything to everyone all the time. And that's become our demise, as opposed to our subsidies should go to our parks, our trails, our open spaces, and maybe services that we might deem to be more common good aligned. But when you think about exclusive, highly specialized spaces in our communities that are very resource intensive, we did not do the math. And Chuck would align with this. He talks about this a lot, and so does Kevin Shepard at Verdunity. And we do not do the math very well in local government, period. We just did an analysis for an organization in California, and they were adamant about building this $50 million recreation center that was in a 2019 master plan, which had no fiscal analysis. And at the end of the day, you understand that over the next 25 years, that $50 million construction bill actually adds up to $140 million in operations and maintenance costs associated with that asset. But we don't talk about that. We don't pull the curtain back and go, let's talk about all the detail, right? The devil's in the detail. So we need to do a better job. And I truly believe we're in a great position right now, an opportunistic position, because we're starting to have these conversations, unfortunately, because of desperation in some communities. But nonetheless, I think many have gotten there to say, okay, we need to rethink our idea of growth. We need to rethink how we develop. We need to rethink how we're budgeting. We need to rethink the use of our revenue streams, rather than it's always got to be about the next bright, shiny thing that we can add to our system, because it's coming at a pretty significant price to our communities.
Yeah. Well, you name dropped Kevin. Here's Kevin. So it was wonderful to learn. I didn't learn this until just today that you know Kevin and are working with him. So why don't you introduce this photo for the audience?
Yeah, so this is we actually host a financial sustainability certificate program. It's been primarily for public park and recreation professionals, but we're now seeing planners in the room and engineers in the room and city managers in the room. We've even had elected officials come to this class. We've held about 30 of these since 2023. This one happens to have been in Lewisville, Texas, in the Dallas Metroplex. Kevin in the background there, and then his cohort Marshall, both with Verdunity, and they're a land use fiscal analysis firm, and they do incredible work. And we've been privileged to not only get to know them, but work together on a couple of projects.
Yeah, yeah.
And Kevin and I are actually teaching a part 2 together. So I've been teaching part 1, and he and I now, he's a retired planner, engineer. We're now teaching a part 2 and reaching a broader audience and casting a broader net around this very topic.
Fantastic. And I pulled up Kevin's website, again, Verdunity, and Kevin's name might be familiar to my audience here. Yes, he has been on the podcast. I think it was way back in season 1. It might have been audio only at that time. So, way back in the dark ages of 2020 and the pandemic, I think is when he and I last spoke. This brings up another initiative that comes to mind when you were talking about access, and that is the Trust for Public Land and the 10-minute walk campaign to try to ensure that these parks and open spaces and facilities are truly accessible to as many people as possible within a community, and this concept of trying to create this concept of a 10-minute walk, meaning that you shouldn't have to go out of your way to try to get to one of these mega facilities where you may have to drive just to get there. But I like to say, these activity assets should really be accessible for everyone, all ages and all abilities. It should be like a 10-minute walk from your domicile, or I also like to say, or a 5-minute bike ride. It needs to be someplace that, proximity-wise is there. And it's okay if it's not a mega park. It's okay that it's not this massive, massive sports complex. It could be access to, like is in the photo here, like a riverfront, a linear park, or it could be a pocket park. Speak to that a little bit, and how does that relate back to what you guys talk about in terms of like helping cities understand the fiscal responsibility of, okay, if you do head in this direction of a pocket park or a smaller footprint access to nature, you still have to budget for it so that you maintain it and it doesn't immediately go into disarray.
Yeah, again, a lot to unpack there. I will say there was an actually very good colleague was instrumental in, I would suggest, the principal driver in this Park Score 10-minute walk campaign for Trust for Public Lands. There's a lot of nobility in this, right? Be able to walk to a park within 10 minutes of the threshold of my home. But as we create that ambition, we've got to be able to maintain these assets, right? And we've gotten so in the weeds around benchmarking. The national standards are to suggest we have to have this many parks per 1,000 people, but we don't speak about the quality of the asset.
Right. Exactly.
We just suggest we're going to have, this green space that could potentially fall into disrepair if we have assumed too much.
Can I jump in real quickly? Can I jump in
Sure.
real quickly and say that I'm glad you mentioned that quality matters, because when I really talk about an activity asset being truly safe and inviting and welcoming to all ages and abilities, there's a difference between, one of Boulder's, brilliant off-street network of trails that is, it has, a beautiful setting, access to the river, the Boulder Creek and nature, and one where you're like on a pathway that's in an industrial area and you don't feel safe. It's bleak. You get where I'm going here.
Oh,
because my
absolutely.
background is in behavior modification. And if we want to encourage people to change their behavior and be more active, especially for everyday utilitarian purposes, it has to be a pleasant experience. You can't not feel like you're fearful of your life. And so I'm glad you really mentioned that the qualitative side matters as well.
Yeah, we admittedly, our team, we push back on benchmarking depending on what it is. Benchmarking has its, time and place, but when it comes to certain things, it is a useless exercise. To suggest that community X should have this many acres per 1,000 and this community should have this many acres per 1,000 is a very difficult and rational approach to take. There's a kind of a predictable irrationality to that. I don't know if that's a word, but it's kind of how I think about it. We're working with an organization right now. They're in a very densely populated part of the United States. TPL, their park scored 92% of the community lives within 10 minutes of a park. But here's the rub. They have a lot of sidewalks to nowhere. It's not a walkable community by any stretch. It's incredibly car-centric. So just because that park is within 10 minutes doesn't mean I can get there. Alternatively, certain communities in the United States have a lot of HOAs. And in those HOAs, they have a lot of assets that are theirs and theirs alone to use for their homeowners. They're not community assets. They're HOA assets. Those tend to get folded into some of these metrics and these analyses. So there's a lot of unintentional mislead. Again, I think there's nobility in the idea that everyone is within a 10-minute walk of a park or a public space. But you need to dive deeper. You need to go below the surface a bit and really get into the nuance and the details around this before you can actually make a statement around 72% of my community can access a park within 10 minutes or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is exactly the point that I made when I interviewed folks from the, I think it was Bianca Schulacher, from TPL about the 10-minute walk campaign, is that it has to be more than just proximity. It has to be, can you actually get there from here, even though it's theoretically possible? And is it a pleasant experience? And that's where one of the beefs that I have with a lot of things like walk score and routing systems, like, if you use Google Maps to get you from point A to point B, it almost always facilitates the quickest route. Doesn't necessarily mean the most enjoyable route or the safest route or the most beautiful route. I mean,
Yeah.
context
And again,
really matters. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, probably 6 months ago, there was a celebratory post on LinkedIn about, we have just met our metrics for, the 10-minute walk campaign. And if you look under the hood, the city, very large, major metro area in the United States, is in fiscal crisis and chaos. It's like you already have hundreds of millions of dollars in maintenance backlog just in parks and recreation, and you're adding more to the system so that you can get an award or create this celebratory facade around the fact that you're doing good work, and you're not. It's quintessential irresponsibility in local government. And it's really an incredibly unfortunate narrative, again, that we've been sharing. The stories have been the wrong stories to tell.
Right.
Very simply.
Yeah. Well, and here's the challenge too, is that and Chuck talks about this a lot as well, is that if you just keep adding more, let's use roads as an example, roadway miles, you're just creating more fiscal responsibility and future, debt obligations, obligations for future maintenance, et cetera. Same thing with parks and trails and pathways. These are activity assets. These are assets, when you look at it from that, standpoint of these are wonderful amenities and benefits to the community, et cetera, if ... they're safe and inviting and welcoming and well-maintained and da-da-da-da-da. In other words, they're also, yes, they are assets, but they are also liabilities and responsibilities that you have to maintain, and we have not only the money but also the physical resources, the people that can upkeep these. We were having a discussion just recently with here on the podcast from up in Canada, up in Winnipeg, about the fact that at one point in time they had a full-time person responsible for maintaining the parks and from a horticulture perspective and keeping the gardens alive and everything. And then, it just was determined, we don't have enough money to do that. And so in the 1960s, they laid this person off, or they didn't replace this person after they retired, or whatever the case may be. And what used to be like a park that was so beautiful that it was featured on postcards, goes into disrepair and neglect and all of these things. How does a city, and this is an unfair question for you to answer, but I mean, it brings up the point that when you look at the city budget, there's a lot of other competing narratives and competing projects that are screaming, we need attention. And again, if it's a typical North American city, maybe also in Australia and New Zealand and other places where you've had horizontal car-oriented development pattern, you are going to have fiscal challenges and strain, and not enough money can go around.
Yeah, there's no one answer to that, clearly. But the oversimplification here is we just didn't know when to say enough was enough. And so it's led us to this place now of competing interests, priorities. Whose priorities? We ask that question a lot. Whose priorities? The special interest that keeps blowing into the council meetings and keeps demanding, that is that your priority, or is it, public health indicators? What is your priority? And so I think that's something that systems struggle with. They have to grapple with is, what is the priority? Do we have the backbone and the spine to address the conflicts and make some very difficult choices and tell people, frankly, no when they need to hear no? It wasn't that long ago, I facilitated a full day workshop on stewardship and sustainability, fiscal stewardship. with a council. And the mayor, very end, he said, the one big takeaway I have from this is I need to learn to say no more and stop being a people pleaser. And I'm like, oh, there you go, right? I mean, I couldn't have asked for more. Very nice human. He cares deeply for his community, but he didn't want to tell anybody no. So they just kept adding to the system, and now they're underwater financially. And he's saying, okay, now we need to call time. So I think when a local government gets into that place of budget, first of all, stewardship is not an annual exercise. I say this over and over again. There's no finish line to this work. It needs to be all day, every day. We need to be very thoughtful about where we're spending and investing. What kind of returns are we getting? Are we having the impacts we need to have, right? There's some of these more obvious questions we need to ask and answer. But you can't go into a budget session annually and just, pull straws or put a bunch of Post-it notes up on a wall. It is completely ineffective. That is bad management at its finest. You've got to dive deep. You've got to understand the cost of providing services. You've got to understand what your revenue projections look like. You can't keep expecting to get more of what may not exist. You have to think differently about what you have. And I think those things can be very revealing in terms of connecting the dots between available resources, impact, right, intended outcomes in a community, and where we need to be spending those precious resources. And that's sometimes a really difficult exercise for people to go through. And I will say this, any opportunity I have now as I've gotten older, I didn't have much of a filter when I was young, and it's really gotten thin as I've aged. We have a lot of people in very influential positions that should not be in those positions. We have city managers that should not be city managers, and we have council members that should have never run for a council seat. I think that's the minority, but those that are doing damage because they don't have the conviction to make very difficult decisions on behalf of their community proper, are creating more problems. And that is the last thing local government needs right now. It needs adaptive leadership. It needs courage. It needs it needs the conviction, again, to have really difficult conversations. That is what's going to be necessary to dig some of these systems out of the big holes that they've dug for themselves.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned it earlier in, sort of channeling public health, which is my background. I started my career in public health, really working on healthcare cost containment strategies and all of that for 15 years. Then 20 some odd years ago, I made the shift to looking at our built environment and how that impacts health and well-being and public health. So doing the math, that's 35 years I've been doing this. And it comes to mind that we don't really think about how this intersects with public health. You also mentioned public safety, and we don't really think about how this intersects with that. It's always, that's just the parks. We can bleed them to death. We don't need to fund this. We don't need to. We can build it. And then once it's built, it's done. I hear you saying that a part of dealing with this is not continuing to add to the responsibilities and add to the liability, build even more parks and trails or whatever that you can't afford. But at the same time, I'm also hearing you saying that for these cities, they need to get real about what they're funding and how they're funding it. Because if you're sending like the bulk of your dollars to transportation and public safety and all these other areas, you're going to be starving a whole bunch of other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, we are a public health profession. And, I will challenge any system by way of saying, what are the health indicators in your community? We can start your purpose conversation right there. What are the health indicators in your community? Very few can answer that question. They've not picked up a public health report. They haven't looked at a school district report to say that, 42% of the children in our community are considered clinically obese, hypothetically. Mental health is a huge problem in our community. We don't do that. And what we do is we say, what's the latest trend in public parks and recreation? Pickleball. Now, pickleball is a great healthy activity, but are we being intentional about saying, all right, if we want to address childhood obesity in our community, what services should we be offering? And what's the manner in which we should be offering? And what other entities within the community should we bring together to collaborate to try to impact that issue? We are a public health profession, and we've lost our way over the years. Daddy-daughter dances and parent-child dances are lovely and they're really cute, but is that the best use of subsidies? right? For the 30 kids and the 30 parents that show up. If we just really dissect our service menu, we would start to question what we're doing and why we're doing it. We should always be starting with, what's the intended purpose here? What's the intended outcome? If it's to address public health indicators, then we need to work backwards and say, all right, what kind of services should we be offered in order to do that? But this idea that we're just going to keep building things and keep adding things to our system is it's a backwards way of thinking about community impact. And I think systems that when you start asking those questions and you poke the bear a bit and you get provocative, they go, yeah, I mean, all we're talking about is a logic model, right? It's a business model. But we're so driven by our big social service hearts in public parks and recreation, we tend to engage this particular, thing that drives logic, right? It drives intelligent decision making, and we've got to balance these two things, and we don't do a very good job of that sometimes.
Yeah. So we've been lingering on your resources page. So I want to mention the fact that, yes. So obviously you are a boutique consultancy, and you are, working directly with cities, but you also have some wonderful posts out on your resources page. Why don't you introduce this to the audience as well?
Yeah, so I write quite a bit. I'm actually in the process. I followed my role models lead. Ryan, of course, Short from Civic Brand, just released his book. I'll be releasing one in the first quarter. But I've been writing a lot of articles over the years, and they're about things, again, that we typically don't talk about. Those are on this resource page. We've got podcasts and interviews and the webinars that we've done over the years on here as well. It's a really, I think, very valuable resource page. Many people that have been in either the classes I've taught, in the organizations of which we've had the chance to work, have used this as I think, a great resource to help inform and educate their colleagues, bring it to attention of a city manager, maybe an elected board or council. But it's really gotten quite the warm reception, and we're very proud of the build out. So yeah, and there have been some very provocative articles on there that have rubbed some individuals the wrong way. And I welcome those debates and that deliberation.
Well, and it is. It's difficult, especially, and Chuck brings this up all the time as part of the Strong Towns narrative. It's difficult to make a lot of these difficult decisions from a fiscally responsible perspective when your built environment, your community, is built upon a model that, again, as I said earlier, you just can't tax people enough to be able to support the infrastructure obligation that you have, on the streets and underground. Yeah.
Well, it's easy to ask people, do you want a new pool? How many people are going to say no? People who really could care less might say no, but it's the manner in which we ask the question. Would you like a new pool? Well, sure. Would you support a new pool? What do you mean by support? Would you pay this much more in taxes annually if you had to support the pool financially? Would you pay this much more in taxes and also pay admission fees to be able to operate and maintain it? The response rate is going to be very different from question one, which is, do you want a pool, to you got to pay for it. And we just don't tell the story in that manner. We don't ask the questions in that manner. It's all about, what do you want? What do you want? And I've heard a few people reference this. I actually use this in the book, but this whole idea of consumerization of local government, that, I pay my taxes, therefore I should get something out of it. Well, you are, but a lot of what you get, you're not paying attention to. Like, that road that you just drove on, and the clean water that you get to drink every day, and the sidewalks, and it's like the synapses aren't firing sometimes when we think about the transaction. And this idea that government's just going to keep giving, and at the same time live in a society where there's a little bit of a distaste around government, I just find to be an incredible conflict. There's a contradiction in all of it. So it's our job to educate and inform, and do it not in a patronizing, or you don't get it, we need to help you understand manner, but in a participatory manner, so that they see themselves as co-stewards rather than the recipient of services. I go to a little coffee shop here in Salida with regularity, particularly since I've been writing a lot. And I was sitting at a table by myself. I secure the same location. I get to plug in. I get there first thing in the morning. And about an hour in, I saw this group of people gravitate to this high top, and they started talking. And what I realized was there were two parents interviewing a potential new swim coach. And we have an aquatic facility in this little community, and it's a hot springs fed aquatic facility. It's incredibly special, but it needs probably $10 million in investment because it's old, it's dated, it's got a lot of issues. And I heard loud and clear the two parents were going on and on about the city. The city's can you believe the city's charging us to use the pool? Can you believe the city raised our fees? Can you believe? And it was like this attack on the city. And I kept my composure and I stayed seated, but I wanted to get up and go, you do understand that you're the city, right? I mean, the city doesn't exist without you, the taxpayer, but it was an attack on the city. And the city, frankly, doesn't charge. They're moving towards a more financially sustainable model, but it was just striking to me, and I shouldn't have been surprised, but it was in my community, right? And I was sitting there as a resident, not as a consultant. But that's a pervasive mindset, right? And perspective that we carry. And I hear it a lot. I hear it from a city council member saying, what do you mean we can't do that for the kids? You're going to tell the kids no? I'm like, oh, this is not a heartstring story. This is supposed to be a very rational conversation around how do you spend what you have? So we're kind of in an interesting place right now. There's definitely it's a tipping point. There's no doubt about it.
And that brings up the question is, what is the model that a city, just using this as an example, this swimming pool and this program, is it a situation where cities have to be looking at this as more like a business and try to turn a profit and be charging? And then if so, then what about the residents that can't afford said services?
Fantastic question. I get this one a lot. Government is not intended to be a profit engine. That's not what government's about. At the same time, government has to cover its costs. It's just the way it is, right? That's the basic model. If I spend $10, I got to find $10. We're not in the business of being wasteful. We're not in the business of losing money. We have to be in the business of recovering our expenses. The manner in which we do that, by way of taxes and alternative revenues and so on, is part of the dance, right? That's the dance we have to dance. But if we're smart, I'll use that word, if we're smarter about how we spend and invest our resources, that allows us to provide for those who need assistance. Because when I'll call this out, this idea of welfare for the rich, when we subsidize services for those who have an ability to pay, we're doing it on the backs of those who can't. We're doing it on the backs of everybody in a community who can. And so, I hear a lot in our work. One of the first things you'll hear from a professional staff in a focus group is we want to keep everything affordable. And I'll always follow with, what does that mean? What do you mean affordable? When you charge $1 for something, there's a value perception on behalf of the customer that it's cheap, it's not worth anything, but you talk about how important the services you provide are. Marketing 101 tells you when you charge $1, the value add to that is nothing from the consumer's perspective. So what do you mean affordable? Well, we don't want to price people out of the market. Well, who are the people that you're talking about? And I'll use senior discounts as the classic example. I go hard in on senior discounts. Across the United States, it's one of these things that we've been doing for decades with the presumption that all older adults can't afford. But here's the fun fact. Across the United States, generalization, the population with the most discretionary income of our older adults. But we keep giving them discounts. But then we can't help the family of four who mom and dad lost their jobs during COVID and they've been working a bunch of part-time jobs because we don't have the resources to help them because we're discounting a population who have an ability to pay. So it's getting into those details in a system, right? Diving deep and going, where are you? What are you subsidizing and to what degree? And is that the best use of your subsidy? Are there alternative ways to think about it? To me, is how you address the issue of affordability in a community and willingness to pay versus ability to pay, and really challenging how you've been spending in contrast to maybe how you should be spending in order to have the greatest impact on the community proper.
Yeah. Well, let's close out with some positivity here. Let's close out on a couple of project spotlight here and some success stories, because what we've been talking about seems kind of like we're doomed. We've our cities are in a situation where what we're subsidizing most every day, day in and day out, is people driving and being able to park for free everywhere and drive everywhere for everything. Sorry, there's no money left for parks and recreation, because that's who we are. We're a driving society. So give some projects. Give us some hope that there's something that we can do in our communities.
Yeah, I said this earlier, probably got lost in the narrative, but this is an opportunistic time. It's a tipping point. We're starting to pay more attention, which to me is a good thing. I think the rose-colored glasses are starting to come off. I can't say enough about a number of systems doing really good work. We just happen to have two. We're starting a brag book, is what we're calling it. Napa, actually, we had a professional narrator come in and help us tell the story of Napa Parks and Recreation. But both of the systems that you see there, Shanahan Park District, Special District in the Chicago metro area, and Napa, California, were struggling financially. Napa, in particular, in April of 2020, was instructed to essentially divest of the park and rec system. And if you think about that, it's a tragedy, right? Napa, California, getting rid of parks and recreation, but they were on a fiscal cliff, and they dove in. They wanted to understand their fiscal realities, their conditions. They engaged their commissioners, their appointed officials, and their elected officials, their city council. They had one-on-one, multi-hour work sessions with them to help them understand what was happening. And they actually created a strategy, a financial sustainability strategy and plan that followed with policy to get them on the right track and on course. And they are, I call them rock stars. It was, a collective effort, really led by their recreation manager, who at the time was kind of serving in an interim director capacity to get the ball rolling. But their entire team jumped on board. Their council was engaged. Their city manager was an advocate. And they flipped the script. And they have truly become a role model, I think, for this work across the United States. And we can't celebrate them enough and champion the work that they continue to do there. The other organization, Shanahan Park District, again, struggling, had a lot of deferred maintenance, had inequities in their community, and wanted to flip the script in how they were spending money. And they've done it. So there's a lot of good work happening, but these are systems that have gone into this eyes wide open. They've not pretended like everything was going to be okay and money was going to fall from the sky. They recognized they had to do business differently. And I couldn't be more proud of them as a fellow park and rec person and just somebody in this field who cares deeply about the future of our profession. They're doing really good work, and they need to be celebrated for it.
Yeah, fantastic. And let's pop on over to that other example so folks can get a quick visual of that. Again, this is in Illinois. Is this in the Chicagoland area?
It is. It's in the Chicago metro area. Chicago has what are called park districts. There's about 8 states in the United States that have park districts, special districts for park and rec services. Illinois happens to have the most. But it's a park and rec system. It just doesn't fall under the umbrella of the city.
Now, is that a good structure? Is that a good structure to consider?
Yeah, it's, a municipal park and rec system and a special district, they have their advantages and their challenges. I don't think one is any better than the other. It's just a different structure. Their taxation tends to be different. They're primarily focused on property taxes. So they both have advantages and they both have challenges.
Well, this is a wonderful introduction to your fabulous organization. I really do appreciate you, introducing this concept to us all. Jamie, is there any final word that you'd like to leave the audience with?
No, I would just say, be a collaborator with your local park and rec department. And if you're not an active participant in the services offered, or you don't, regularly visit a park or an open space or trail, just recognize the value that those things bring to quality of life in the community. And, don't hesitate reaching out to a director or a supervisor, manager, talk to the front desk staff members and learn a little bit more about the system. They're really invested. The vast majority of people in our field care deeply about their communities. They have big social service hearts. They want to do good work, and they want to collaborate with the community. And so I would just, ask you to learn a little bit more about the system and be a co-steward and a co-champion. alongside those people that are doing really good work for you.
Fantastic. Jamie, this has been so much fun and a great honor. And folks, head on over to the website. That's 110%.net, .net, and that is 110 is actually the number 110%. Jamie, again, thank you so very much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast.
Thank you so much.
Again, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Jamie Sabbach from Salida, Colorado. And if you did, please, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and share it with a friend. And if you haven't done so already, I'd be honored to have you subscribe to the channel. Just click on that subscription button down below and ring that notifications bell. And again, if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Hey, super easy to do here on YouTube. You can just hit the join button right down below or leave a YouTube super thanks, or you can navigate over to activetowns.org, click on the support tab at the top of the page, and there's several different options, including becoming a Patreon supporter. Patrons do get early and ad-free access to all the video content, as well as you can leave a donation to the nonprofit. Again, every little bit helps and is very much appreciated. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. It has been an absolute joy and pleasure and honor producing this content over these many years, as well as in 2025. I will see you again in 2026. Again, thank you all so much for tuning in. This is John signing off by wishing you much activity, health, and happiness. Cheers and aloha. And again, just want to send a huge thank you to all my Active Towns ambassadors supporting the channel financially via YouTube memberships, YouTube super thanks, as well as making contributions to the nonprofit and joining my Patreon. Every little bit adds up and is very much appreciated. Thank you all so much.